Welcome to the Future of Structures podcast, where we talk to the experts who are evolving our buildings of tomorrow. And here is your host, Adam Jones.
Today we interview Antony Sprigg. He's the CEO of the Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia, better known as ISCA. So what we cover is a wide range of topics, including what is the technology that is going to impact infrastructure the most, what are the biggest challenges Australia is going to face in the future, how is Australia going to pay for these big infrastructure projects, and also a lot of career advice he would give to his younger self and certain skills that are going to be the most relevant to the future economy. He's a very down-to-earth guy, and I hope you guys enjoy listening as much as I enjoy interviewing him.
From when I was about 8, drawing pictures of solar panels moving to follow the sun on the top of roofs. When I got to university, it was harder to get into an arts degree than a science degree. I also wanted to look at communication and statistics as well as science, but found science far more attractive. And therefore pursued a technical undergraduate, three majors in structural geology and geophysics and geochemistry and the like, and went into engineering consulting in a geotechnical sense, and that was interesting. That was useful because I got to see some of Australia's biggest infra and mine projects, from feasibility all the way through to construction. I got to see safety as a major issue, social issues. I got to see the financial challenges with projects, but I also realised that I wasn't able to influence the outcomes. I was simply there providing geotechnical design advice and modelling and things like that. So I did work in the NGO space for pro bono, in supporting new tech, green industries and things like that. I then, as soon as I finished my Masters in Geotechnical Engineering, I then got a job in environmental engineering and started to step into sustainability and that using professional services as a way of doing that, and did a global materiality assessment for myself and recognised that infrastructure was probably the missing link with respect to addressing sustainability. We'd seen progression in the building space, but nothing in infrastructure, and I thought, well, at least from a professional service perspective, this could be a focus. And ironically enough, if you understand anything about Jungian psychology and the collective unconscious, there was an initiative called the Australian Green Infrastructure Council coming to fruition, and somehow I got invited to participate in that as a volunteer. So in addition to my consulting work, I got into essentially the embryo of what is now the Infrastructure Sustainability Council and the Infrastructure Sustainability Rating Scheme. And I progressed from more environmental technical work to change management, advisory work, so much so in the last couple of years in my professional services career, I was advising upstream to both super funds and major owner-operators of large road, rail, port networks, from business case, strategic planning, resilient sustainability perspective. So, and then I also, in parallel, was involved. I was supportive of the Australian Green Infrastructure Council and was actually the project manager in developing the first version of the scheme when I was still in consulting, and managed a lot of the engagement and consultation and the architectural design behind it. And so I was inherently close to it, and deploying it even informally on billions and billions of dollars of infrastructure investment at the time prior to formal launch. But then I continued doing what I was doing from a professional services perspective, and then at some point around 2012, the organisation approached me and asked if I would step in as an interim CEO, as a secondee, to I suppose, assist with the organisational transformation from simply developing the tool to actually starting to formally implement it and engage more strategically with Australian New Zealand infrastructure decision makers and procurers and so on.
Yeah, wow, that's actually super interesting. So I'd like to just quickly go back to the start of your journey just for a little bit. So you mentioned you started it in big geotech projects and things like that, and you didn't really get the chance to explore your passion in sustainability. So is that why you moved in and started volunteering for organisations and things like that?
Partly, but I think the other one was that I felt, and geotech was actually going through a little bit of a revolution, because finally clients were spending more than 0.025% of the capital value on investigation, and realising it's one of the biggest risks, and they should be spending, 2.55, 7.5%. So that was a big step in client side recognising that geotech was a material risk to project costs and project safety and so on during construction and also operation. So I recognised the influence that you could play from a geotech perspective, but I still felt it was particularly limited, and that I ultimately wanted to have more of an influential role rather than purely providing technical support. So it was really wanting to support industry from and projects and clients and so on, but from a more strategic, influential perspective, and ensure that that environment and community issues and resilience and sustainability and climate change and all the catchphrases are fundamentally and systematically and practically considered in planning and design processes and valued.
Yep.
So it was just wanting to be able to achieve more and support more widely and hopefully enable greater outcomes.
So was sustainability valued back when you started your career, or has it progressed a lot since when you started?
I think it's had its ebbs and tides. I actually think, ironically enough, for all of the terms, resilience is now starting to settle down and become a mature concept and being decoupled from climate change. And I recognise that it's actually really good asset management practice, for example. Sorry for coughing.
That's all right.
I think that that with Australia's lack of support of putting some sort of pricing mechanism on carbon, I think we've gone back 10 years. It's really, really frustrating both public sector and private sector. It's not a political issue for most. Some people have already costed it in. And I think something that I've just observed recently is the failure to value that one single externality, so I consider an economic externality, not an environmental externality, that one single externality has meant that the evaluation of financial or non-financial of other critical externalities, like environment or like social impact or community health or whatever, which could even attract financing, if valued properly, simply hasn't taken off because the one obvious one hasn't secured the fundamental political treasury support. So I think that in some areas we've progressed a little bit, but I also think that there's a lot more to do, and quickly.
Okay, and just on that, do you think carbon pricing is something that's just a matter of time rather than when something like that comes in?
I do. I think it is, but in a sense, it's rushed to the bottom now, because there's states doing some pretty clever things, but it's ad hoc because there isn't that national approach. Organisations are doing some clever things, but it's ad hoc because there isn't that national and fundamental economic adjustment. So it will, but I think everyday loss is the further downstream. The impact's even greater with where the benefit should be being realised.
Yeah, cool. So can you please just tell us a little bit about the Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia and the vision for it in the future?
Sure. So we are a registered charity. We are a member-based organisation because that's how the organisation originally came together, and quite wisely so, because sustainability is about collaboration, independent of whatever commercial contractual policy constraints or or trends. This is the long game, bringing together private and public sector. So that is something relatively unique with us. That 50% of our members are government. We are trying to attract the full cross-section of key infrastructure stakeholders into the community of practice. So that's everything from investors, public funders, procurers, planners, contractors, designers, owner-operators, and material suppliers, and all the key support around that life cycle of infrastructure. And we're evolving, and that whole key stakeholder group is growing over time. So it's a community of practice to articulate what sustainability actually is and how it can be measured and how performance and benefits can be realised. It's a community of practice to maintain continuous improvement, because the world is changing, policy is changing, outcomes are changing, some things are progressing, and we've got to continue to raise the bar. Fundamentally within all of this, the real engine is obviously the Infrastructure Sustainability Rating Scheme, which was launched in the middle of 2012, and then we changed our name and brand around that time, later in 2012, early 2013. And it's the engine because it's a voluntary mechanism for projects from pre-procurement all the way through the procurement, design, delivery, and then through into operations, including current operating assets, to be able to self-assess, use a structured document and guidance on benchmarks as to what is expected if you have business as usual versus what is best practice, what is the most sustainable outcome achievable at a very practical level, and be able to integrate it into your project and ensure that it's not a bolt-on. And so that the project, all the way from upstream and planning phase, owns these issues and uses it to de-risk them, to inform decisions, and to hopefully deliver a much smaller footprint, a much more efficient asset, an asset that has a social license that's positive, that's climate friendly, and so on. So the scheme itself, the collaborative means by which we develop it, continue to engage around it, and we continue to evolve with it, that becomes the vehicle to generate a greater appetite in wanting to understand what is applied sustainability, how do people become empowered to be able to deliver these outcomes, and hence we have a suite of training and educational packages that then essentially are quite attractive, because it's almost sustainability 101 unpacked. And so education and training, deployment of the scheme, the communities of practice are sort of the key elements to the organisation, and our goal and ultimate mission is really to ensure that that the triple bottom line or quadruple bottom line is used as both a risk and opportunity filter to right from the early stages in project planning all the way through to asset operations, to enhance decision making, to improve decision making around whether the right project and that the right project is designed and delivered in a way that actually hopefully starts to generate regenerative and restorative outcomes, rather than simply mitigating impacts and risks. So it's both. There's economic benefits, because the more there are more successful investments in projects, the more likely more investments will occur to meet the huge demand in infrastructure. But at the same time, we have to start reversing impacts, and we should be using the significant buying power of infrastructure to enable that.
So the saving money part, does that come in the terms of, like, say, material saving if you go sustainability, or what kind of things would save money with a sustainable infrastructure project?
I think there's some very practical things that we've logically observed through stakeholders that are applying the scheme. So anything from smarter energy sources and usage during construction that we've seen can save millions and millions of dollars. Smart design, which we know, for those with experience in the industry, smart design can really save a significant amount of waste generation, spoil generation during construction, and of course has the knock-on benefits of reduced emissions and so on. So of course there's the logical resource efficiency aspect, but then looking at whole of life. So whole of life is typically something that isn't naturally costed in. which generates perverse incentives. But ultimately, every asset that's delivered should be looking at optimizing its operational performance. So whether that's deployment of LED lighting or minimization of waste impacts or consultative means of engaging with key stakeholders all the way through, because one of the corollaries is that poor relationships with regulators, poor relationships with contractor project or asset partners, and poor relationships with local communities generate concerns, and those concerns can cause delays or other disruptions, which of course affect the bottom line. So, there's direct savings, but there's also significant indirect savings as well.
Yeah. So there's huge infrastructure projects going on in Australia at the moment. Is projects like Melbourne Metro and things like that, are they getting rated with the tool? Or?
Absolutely. So currently the latest numbers are, I think we have over 83 billion of capital value of infrastructure, either having been certified or currently going through the process. We have, I don't know how many billion, 40, 50 billion of brownfield assets, so assets that have been operating for some time that are using the ISCA operations scheme, because they're huge networks of road or rail or whatever. We are the IS scheme is mandated by almost every transport authority in Australia, either for their medium to large projects, but some of them, like Transport for New South Wales, are now looking at smaller scale investments. So yes, absolutely. Sydney Metro, Melbourne Metro level crossings authority. They're all utilising it. Dipty in South Australia, Manroads WA, TMR. But we've also got renewable energy projects coming through. So solar farm in Sunshine Coast, and a wind farm out in Ararat in Victoria. Water treatment authorities are getting, or water authorities, so just as SA Water sign up, and they're going to start using the scheme, and also strong traction from the transport and other asset classes in New Zealand, as well as ports and airports. So.
Wow, that sounds like 83 billion. Sounds like pretty much every infrastructure project in Australia, but I don't know how much money goes into it. But
I think there's a bit more, but that's your rolling investments, particularly with sort of small to medium with councils. That's why we've delivered a smaller capital works version of the scheme, to over time be able to partner with councils to pick up that sort of more standard infrastructure investment.
Yeah, cool. So is there any elements of any projects that are quite innovative, and because of the rating tool, that it might have driven them to make some innovative decisions, or any new technology that is exciting, you think?
Look, I'm sure there are quite a few. I'm probably not familiar with all of them because I don't get into the detail with the single rating. But there's probably a couple that come to mind, which either the rating tool did help the project team to elucidate, or alternatively encourage them to push those good initiatives even further, and also for them to be recognised for them. So off the top of my head, there was a restorative biodiversity initiative that Fremantle Port, through the Rouse Hedge Industrial Park project, that just secured its as-built rating a couple of weeks ago, with the tern, I think it's a fairy tern bird, and it's been a huge success, and a huge success with local communities, and was one of the genuine few biodiversity restorative outcomes that we've seen, and asset deliver, not only deliver but actually broaden even post-project. So I think that's incredibly positive ecological outcome, and it shows it can be done, and the wider benefits with it. We've seen in one of the early packages of the Sydney Rail Link project in Auckland, so it's a large rail project in the CBD, where through we know from the actual contractor, because they were asked to pursue an IS rating, they had to look at energy and carbon and how to reduce their footprint and drive efficiencies during construction in particular, and they challenged how they would power up their road headers. And the incumbent model, they thought they were going to follow. They challenged that, and the alternative, which they are actually deploying, is saving them in the tens of millions, just from what we understand. There's been, I think WA and one of the alliances, the Gateway Alliance, which is, I think, Leighton and maybe GHD and a couple of others, I'm not off the top of my head, but they were doing some very clever things with sorry, I'm just trying to think, maybe it was ACOM anyway. They were doing some clever things with trying to establish LED lighting on a new road, but LED lighting that had never been deployed before because of conflicts with airports and pilots because of the brightness. And so they did manage to find something that they could forward procure because it wasn't in Australia yet, and deploy that. So that was particularly clever. There's a suite of things that typically come out of each rating with how a project's done something that's particularly smart or sustainable.
Awesome, mate. I've got a much more difficult question coming up. So. Like, there's a lot of talk about Australia reaching zero emissions by 2050. What does that look like with infrastructure? Because for me, it looks like there's so much embodied materials and energy and things like that going into our infrastructure. So how can we reach ambitious goals like that? Is that possible?
I think without putting a national price on carbon, it's almost impossible. I'm pretty confident in saying that the infrastructure sector in general, through transport, there is a huge amount of work that needs to be done. I think there's some low-hanging fruit which would deliver not just carbon benefits but also asset operational optimization benefits. I think it's totally doable and that's potentially attractive from both private and public funding perspective, but the eye is simply not on that ball at the moment. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are filtering through as a government reporting requirement. And we know some top transport authorities are starting to measure their footprints from a carbon perspective, but there really isn't consistency regarding policy and enabling that policy and accelerating that enablement to be able to necessarily reach those sorts of targets. There are some very good state-based initiatives, but again, it's got to be holistic, it's got to be practical. Fingers crossed, but there's a lot of good people with good intentions and they're trying to make things happen. But without that holistic approach and that market-based driver, it does make it difficult. But at the same time, when we look at the traction around the deployment of IS, and we're looking forward to the traction around the deployment of IS for operations, that will certainly make a fair swathe of our infrastructure in Australia ready to be able to respond to those targets.
Yeah, cool.
Prepare them from the bottom up.
Yeah. Is there any other barriers for us in the way of us reaching zero emissions like that, or you mentioned we've got the carbon price? Like, what else needs to change, you think, for us to reach those ambitious goals?
I think we need to be, as an industry, both private and public sector, I think we do need to be a little bit more genuinely creative and collaborative around packaging up investment opportunities that are linked with urban growth, urban livability solutions that will then define the infrastructure needs of the future, rather than deploying the same as model. Because at the moment there's a disconnect between the planning processes and the fact that there's such a critical demand for infrastructure that infrastructure is simply just going and may not meet the actual, I suppose, people's needs, their aspirations from a livability, sustainability perspective, but also it may not necessarily even be the right solutions given the accelerated progress of technology and information and so on. So I think that we need to bypass that rather than try and get all the planning processes right and all the ducks lined up. I think there's other ways of packaging up identifying solutions and being able to attract the approval and the funding and finance for them.
What technology do you think is going to have the biggest impact and is the most exciting going forward? the renewable energy or driverless vehicles?
Yeah, that's probably the toughest question because
it's hard to predict in 5 years ago.
I do think that the whole renewable energy aspect is going to accelerate. I think it's hard to ignore now.
Yeah.
And so how that plays out will probably influence a lot of the other technologies, including driverless vehicles and public transport, and various other solutions. If we don't invest, and particularly decentralization, and we don't support decentralized city models, for example, well, then we're simply going to promulgate large-scale transport infrastructure back into the major hub because that's what has to happen.
Yeah.
So I do think there's some fundamental planning challenges that will either enable some of the very brilliant technology and models out there, or simply they'll just sit there and only be sort of marginally used, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So with all the technology coming through and changing everything at a fast rate, what do you think is the most important skill for someone to develop so they're relevant in the future economy with all this new technology coming through?
I think that one needs to recognize that more and more so, one needs both a technical background or discipline as well as non-technical, and that one needs to be aware of various opportunities or initiatives or technologies or solutions.
Yeah.
But also more conscious and more savvy regarding the decision-making processes that affect where you work and the role you want to play. Because I think that without appreciating those, particularly now, one will struggle to be able to inject the contemporary technologies and solutions and innovations in a way that will ensure that there is appropriate take-up. So it's that kind of balanced rather than simply having a particular core technical discipline. I don't think everyone needs to be able to write apps and various other things. Some people have different technical strengths, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I think it's around the broader context and how these things get applied, particularly in our industry, that's probably more critical now than ever.
Yeah, cool. So just on that, as we wrap it up now, mate, what advice would you give to your graduating self when you were younger and just starting your career?
What advice would I give? I would certainly, just trying to think, I remember seeing that question. To probably have pursued in parallel with the technical, the sort of technical academic aspects, but probably ensured that I was also maintaining some sort of parallel interest or education or practical experience in some of the non-technical issues at the time, because that would have accelerated the sort of natural merge.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Antony, for your time, mate. I'm sure you've got a very busy day ahead of you. So it's been awesome having you on the podcast, and I'm sure everyone listening learns a lot from you.
Well, I hope so.